Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Indian Nation Station pregame show right here on the Indian Nation Station. I'm AJ Ganger. Welcome back with me this time, Brian Gillespie. I knew I threw him under the bus, I think, 3 times the last pregame show for not being here.
You didn't give me a choice. I had to go back to defend my honor.
So I'm glad that you're back now because it'll be a little easier to talk to somebody else besides myself for once.
Well, you know, sometimes it's easier to talk to yourself, but it's not as much fun.
No, it's definitely not, especially when you're talking about Piqua Indians football. This is going to start tonight, a 3-game stretch of home games for the Indians as we play Greenville tonight, and we have our huge matchup against Troy next week, which we'll talk about more in detail next week. And then we have West Carrollton for homecoming on the 4th. We go to Xenia for our next road game on October the 11th. And then we're at home for senior night against Sydney on the 18th and close the year out at Fairborn. Brian, it's not a very favorable schedule but for the team that we are and are starting to be, I'm still looking maybe 3-4 wins.
Well, I'll tell you what, there is, as I've said on the radio broadcast, there is no team in the state of Ohio that's played as difficult a schedule as Piqua has coming out of the gate. 3 road games against 3 of the top teams in their regions. You got 2 teams that have been dominant in Tip and Lima Senior. They're tops in each of their respective regions. And then you've got Butler's number 3 in its region. All 3 of those games were on the road. You can't explain how that's one of the harder schedules I've ever heard Piqua to have in the past 20 years. And as you look at the schedule remaining, it lightens up some. But there isn't a ton of room for error when it comes to certain games. There's still a lot to gain down the stretch here with huge games of Troy and Xenia and Sydney, and there's some other games in there that are winnable like this week's game. But you know, Piqua's got things in front of them. They've got a lot of season in front of them, and they've got a lot of opportunities in front of them. Definitely have a lot of seasons. I mean, you look though, the 2 toughest games probably left on their schedules, Troy and then at Xenia. And then, I mean, they could beat Sydney. Sydney's just an offensive scoring team, and they gave up like 50 points to Stebbins. We held Stebbins to 13. Our defense is going to be good enough, I think, to keep us in most of these games. It's just going to be our offense being able to score points. Well, if I'm being honest, they've been in pretty much every game so far. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at last week's game against Tip, we'll talk about that in a little bit, but every game has been reasonably competitive. Yeah. It hasn't felt like it's ever got out of hand. It hasn't felt like maybe last season felt where there wasn't a ton of hope when you played against a good team. Yeah. These games have been grinded out affairs. So much improvement from this Piqua team. But again, when you play the schedule they've played, sometimes that doesn't bear out in the record yet. Yes. But I think you might see that as we go down the stretch. Don't forget that all of our games that we are covering, no matter the sport for the Indian Nation Station, are on tape delayed on Channel 5 and our YouTube page. We're only covering home football games this season and any playoff games that we may be able to attend, so just keep that in mind. Brian, we have a bunch of sponsors here for the 24-25 season. Let's go ahead and list these off here. We got Lemon Meringue Floral Boutique, Bits and Pieces, This and That's Candy on Main, Dick Lumpkin's Auto Body, Edison State Community College, Roberts Brothers Comfort, Dr. Littlejohn, Little Caesars Pizza, Buffalo Wings and Rings, Atlanta Sportswear, Craig's Corporation, the Kathy Henney Team, and Harmony Systems. Thank you for supporting the Indian Nation Station and Piqua Athletics. Brian, I've got cool new graphics that when we move into our next segment here, they're going to pop up on the screen as we're talking about it. So be on the lookout for that when you watch this edition, because we know you didn't watch the last edition of the pregame show. All right, let's take a look at our scores from around week number 4 in the FBL. Sydney was a 37-27 winner over Fairborn. Xenia 49, Stebbins 6. Butler 41, Greenville 7, Troy 48, West Carrollton 7, and of course Tip City 35, and Piqua 10. Sydney is in these shootout games that are 10, 14-point winners all the time. I do not understand Sydney right now. Well, I'll tell you what, if you follow it quarter by quarter, next time you check, every single time somebody scored. And that was the same way last week. Sydney jumped out to a big early lead. It looked like they were, going to cruise past Fairborn, and next thing you know, Fairborn scores. Now we're back into the game. It's a 10-point game. They did end up winning by 10, but yeah, they've loved those shootouts this year, and that's the total opposite of the way Piqua plays.
Yeah, totally the opposite of the way Piqua plays. I mean, you look at the Butler game, for example, that was a 17-7 game, 24-13. When Piqua had to score a bunch of points to beat a team at Lima Senior, they couldn't do it because that's just not how they're built to play.
No, Lima Senior was just loaded with talent. And, you get behind them, they just keep pouring it on, they just keep pushing you. I think they scored in the 70s last week in their win, and, they don't have any qualms about running you out of their own building.
One of the teams that's pretty surprising this year for just how good they've been and the teams they've beat, Vandalia Butler. They've beaten Troy, they've beaten Piqua. I mean, they have played some good teams, and they haven't lost.
And they also beat Northmont. Now, Northmont isn't what Northmont's been in the past couple of years. Northmont's been struggling a little bit. They almost lost to Beaver Creek last week. So it's not the same Northmont.
No, definitely not the same
Northmont.
Northmont.
Going to Northmont week 1 set, Butler on the path that they're on right now. And they flipped the script on them after last year where Northmont took them to beat them pretty decently. And then got that, and then they beat Piqua. And they really turned the page on the previous, 3 or 4 coaches that, it was like hot potato.
Right.
Now they have a coach that's been there. He was an assistant forever, played there. They have that thing rolling in the right direction now for sure.
Very disciplined too, that team as well. Let's go ahead and take a look at our stats from our last game against Tip City. Caden Thomas was 12 of 19 for 74 yards. He also ran the ball 16 times for 75 yards in their lone touchdown. Jericho Burns had 22 carries for 64. Zayden Allen, Rayshawn Garrett led the way with tackles on defense. Piqua led the game in first downs in 13-12, but time of possession, Brian, when Tip City has over 20 minutes more per time of possession than you're just not going to win that game.
Well, yeah, you just felt like, and Tip had like 8,000 penalties.
Yeah, 12 for Tip and 9 for Piqua.
I'm surprised 12 is the number. It felt like 100 that game. Every time Tip would start going, and they'd shoot themselves in the foot and get a penalty, and Piqua had 9 of their own. But you look at Tip, they're very creative offensively. They have very good wide receivers. They're a balanced team with good, solid running backs, and you got a good quarterback who can run and pass, and they just kept nicking them. Actually, Piqua had more first downs, but then Tip would hit those big plays, their wide receivers, and when you're a Piqua, you gotta work your way down the field a lot of times. It's a ball control situation. You can't make any errors, or Tip, who's a quick strike offense, get you, and they got him.
And they're one of those passing offenses too. 235 yards through the air. Quarterback was 17 of 24. They were averaging 10 yards a pass play. That right there shows you where you need to work on your defense too. But Tip City was just that good.
Well, they just, I will say Rayshawn Garrett had covered their best receiver.
He did.
He was there.
He was.
His coverage was good on almost every big play they had. That young man just made plays. He out-jumped us, or he dove and made an incredible catch one time up the sideline. There's not a lot you can do or complain about in those scenarios.
No.
Sometimes you just get beat by the better guy across from you.
That was probably one of the better first halves too going in. Piqua came out and they're ready to play. They drove down the field and scored on their first possession, and we were like, oh, this might be a game.
Smash mouth football, man. They ran it right at him, and I don't know whether Tip wasn't prepared for that. I would have thought they would have been. But, man, they just went right between the tackles on the guard center, and they just bang, bam, bam, right down and then definitely Tip adjusted the way they were playing defense. They were run blitzing on almost every down, and that changed the momentum of the game.
It really did, yeah. All right, let's move on from this Tip City game into our Week 5 matchups from around Miami Valley League. We've got West Carrollton traveling to take on Sydney. Fairborn goes to Stebbins. Tip and Troy. That game is at Troy Memorial Stadium on their new turf. The MVL game of the week, obviously, 4-0 Xenia at 4-0 Butler, and then our game against Greenville. Brian, that Xenia Butler game is going to be awesome.
I'll tell you what, there's 2 really good games. You got Xenia at Butler and Tip at Troy.
Yes.
Both those games, Troy's only 14th in Region 8, but they're no pushover, and they're gonna give Tip everything they can handle, especially on the new turf at Troy Stadium.
Yeah.
And then, but yeah, Xenia Butler, and they've been scoring some points.
Yes, they have.
Their running back, I think, had 8 or 7 touchdowns in one game.
They probably played West Carrollton. That's probably how that happened.
A couple weeks ago. Hey, you score 8 touchdowns in a game. I don't care whether you're playing, 7 on 7.
Yeah.
That's still an impressive game. And, that's not going to be like that against Butler because they're pretty sturdy. But that is a huge matchup of 2 Region 8 powerhouses. And that will go a long way to shaping this whole MVL title race.
Got West Carrollton again going to Sydney. Sydney should probably win that one pretty handily, I would say.
Well, lots of points. I think Sydney scores a lot. West Carrollton might even get on the board a few times this week just because Sydney gives up some points to pretty much everyone they play. I think Sydney cruises in that one for sure.
And then obviously Fairborn has Stebbins. That's probably going to be a pretty good game too. Both those teams obviously are always towards the bottom of the league, but Stebbins was very competitive when they did come up here to play, and Fairborn is always competitive too when they come in.
Yeah, they're kind of in the same boat, and you expect a tight, maybe middle of the road, somewhere in the 20s game with that one for sure.
Alrighty, now let's get into our game here tonight, as it is the 1-3 Piqua Indians hosting the 0-4 Green Wave of Greenville. Interesting stat, Brian, that we were just talking about before we came on the air. The MVL was brought back in 2019, and we've played Greenville every single year since. We're 5-0 against Greenville in that time. We've outscored Greenville 210-17 in 5 years, including 2 shutout victories. Both in 2020 and 2021. Piqua's offense has been looking better these past couple weeks. I think we both have to agree on that, but they've struggled against a good tip defense in the second half last week. Brian, what do you know about tonight, and what can you tell us?
Well, I think there's one thing that has changed with Piqua's offense, and I think that's the improvement of Caden Thomas.
Very much.
I think from week to week, you can see him getting a little bit more comfortable in his skin and what he's doing as the lead dog of the offense at quarterback. I think he's made some strides in the passing game. I think he's been a lot more accurate. He clearly has been putting the time and the work in on the passing game. He's also been quite adept at doing the RPOs and running pass options.
Yes.
And he left Tip wondering what the heck was going on a couple times last week when he pulled that ball out at the last second and ran for some yardage.
All the other cameramen got juked out but me. I was still on him.
Oh, you were
I was still on him, man. I got that play.
Tip's whole team got juked out. They stopped playing. They thought they had him. And even the defensive backs were just standing there like, all right, play's over. And there he's got the ball running. He gained at least 15, 20 yards.
Yeah, it was crazy.
That was I haven't seen that too many times where the whole defense just stopped playing. He almost scored a touchdown on that play. So I think that has loosened up. The fact that he's been able to complete some passes and make some plays in the passing game has loosened up that running game for either him or Jericho Burns, not the other way around. Though last week, after they started jamming run blitzes on him, Jericho Burns didn't have a huge day. But I don't know that that's going to be the same situation this week. Greenville's going to have a hard time handling that duo. For sure.
Yeah, they're definitely going to have a hard time handling that. And I feel like Piqua's offense is probably going to be on the field a lot longer than 19 minutes this time.
Oh, yeah, I think that, they'll be able to do, well, they may score a lot of points in those 19 minutes if they do have the ball for 19 minutes, because I don't know that Greenville is going to be able to keep them out of the end zone.
I don't think they are either. I think this is going to be a barn burner blowout here, as always, and the outscore of 210-17 in 5 years is just probably going to grow even more.
Well, I mean, Greenville's lost 16 straight games.
Yeah.
Dating back to October 7th, 2022.
Wow.
So that's pretty rough. During those games this year, they've been outscored at 185-21.
Yeah.
It's been a rough go. They're 5-29 since the beginning of the 2020 season. So
just a struggle time there.
They're just looking for anything that they can hook onto. They've gone through a couple coaches during that time.
Yeah.
It's been a rough grind for Greenville, and unfortunately for them, I don't think it's going to end this Friday.
Well, Brian, is there anything else that you'd like to say before we go off the air here?
No, it's been a pleasure to be back in the saddle with you. I mean, it's a little, after taking a beating in that first episode and from you. And
that you still haven't even watched.
Oh, hey, Don't pay me with that. I have watched some of it. I had to watch it to see.
It was only 6 minutes long.
I had to watch it to see how you ran me down.
It wasn't that bad, I'm sure.
It's been fun, and I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. And, you've got some good games coming up.
Well, Brian, we will see you next week for the Troy game, as you'll be off tomorrow night. Tom Michaels will have the call of the game coming up next here on the Indian Nation station. Don't forget, all of our games are delayed broadcast on our YouTube and on Channel 5. For Brian Gillespie, I'm AJ Ganger. We'll see you next week for Pick with Troy. Go Piqua and beat Greenville.